All right, so let's dive right back into pricing. And like I mentioned just a second ago, we're going to cover parts 2 and part 3 today. The first part was all about the what, the preparation, right? So this time, let's talk about the interpretation of the information that we're going to prepare, as well as the conversation of how to communicate that effectively with each one of our sellers. So quick little recap. We know and we believe that homes sell for 2 reasons. Do you remember what those 2 reasons are?
Yes.
Tell me.
Price and I know it's exposure.
Yes. Very, very good. That is exactly right. So homes do sell for those 2 reasons, price and exposure. Typically, what we know is price is the king. It is what matters more than anything else in the success of a sale of a home versus exposure, because each property goes into the MLS. So that means they're all on the same equal footing in terms of exposure. And because 95% of buyers are realtor represented, the 95% of anybody who's going to be buying is going to be able to have exposure to that or have access to that property. So with that logic, when you ask why is it that homes expire, it has to come down to price more times than not. Price as it relates to the property's condition, price as it relates to the features or the amenities of that home. Okay, we also, as a recap, we talked about the difference between price, value, and entry, because those are 3 very distinct things. We talked about a seller's self-discovery and how important that is in the pricing conversation as part of a listing appointment. You want to tell me what your takeaway was and how important a seller's self-discovery is when it comes to price?
They need to see those facts in front of them. They need to discover the pricing on their own, not have it already in their head of what they need.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. All of that.
Everything.
All of it. Yeah. And you know, I think the other thing too that's great is that when they self-discover, they tend to take ownership of that. You know, we talk a lot about
blame you later.
Right.
Like, that was your price. That wasn't even what we wanted.
Right. And it keeps it, I feel like it keeps it sort of neutral. So when they're allowed to self-discover it on their own based on the facts and the data and the information that's available to them, it's a lot harder than for them to say, well, you told me wrong, or what's going on? Why are we not succeeding at this? When they take ownership of the process and they take ownership of the decision that they reach after reviewing the same information that you have, I just feel that not only does that set the stage for a highly collaborative and productive discussion, even all the way through the transaction process, but it allows them to say, okay, so what can we do? What can we do to drum up some more activity, or what can we do to get this thing to sell quicker? If we know that price isn't the issue, because based on the facts, that's how we arrived at our price entry point. Okay, so conversations then versus presentations. Very, very different things. We talked about conversations being a really good and ideal approach, especially in a listing type environment, really in any environment, if we really looked at it. But conversations are effective because they are what? They're an exchange.
Yeah, two-sided.
Exactly. It's not a presentation where 2 people sit across from each other and the presentation is just blah, 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 blah. And the seller's like, what just happened? Yeah. You lost me right from the beginning. Right. So it's a true team oriented approach. It's they always say that presentations tell and conversations sell. So, and it's because there is a true exchange between both people, which leads us to the 7-step pricing strategy, which incorporates all of that. You will love the 7-step pricing strategy if you're somebody who values collaboration, if you're somebody who values the teamwork aspect of it. Okay, so the first step in our 7-step pricing strategy is gonna center around being able to determine value. We have to know what value exists in a particular area or a neighborhood, because that's how we're going to be able to then justify what our listing can carry in the marketplace. So it's good because we need to also be able to have a broad working knowledge of the pricing that exists in a neighborhood that we're going to be a part of by listing a property there. So step one, we're going to determine the value. So this is good because, like we talked about, there are three distinct value ranges that exist in a neighborhood. There's a high range, a mid-range, and a low range. Excuse me. High, mid, and low. So step one, this one is what takes the most time because this is where you have to be able to determine why certain homes bring certain prices. Okay. So the more that we look at this and the more that we study this, and the more that we can analyze those value ranges that exist in a neighborhood, this is going to be much more time consuming than the actual discussion that you're going to have with your seller. So this is where I mentioned yesterday or Monday where the legwork comes in. So this is what takes the most time. So the process starts by, again, dividing that neighborhood into those three basic categories. So the high, the mid, and the low. The high range, of course, are those homes that bring the most money per foot. Mid-range, homes that fall between the high and the low. And then the low range, of course, is homes that bring the least amount per square foot. So this is just a table that I put together for our discussion today, but a couple of things that I'd like to call your attention to are over here on the right-hand side of this table. And these are what we call the 6 key buying features. Those 6 key buying features are the features that you're going to start to see the patterns visually that exist within each one of those ranges. So for example, if you're noticing that in the high range, the majority of the homes in that range have an oversized lot, that's something that you can say, oh, check that out. All of those that brought this price per square foot all share this in common. So you're going to start to see these little feature patterns emerge. And those 6 key buying features are number of bedrooms. How many bedrooms does the home have? Is it one or multiple stories?
Why does that make a difference?
Here's how my understanding of it. Okay. Features are those types of things that are what I would call the bones of a property. Okay. They're very hard to change, but they are things that make a difference when you're comparing one home to one home. Okay. Because again, that value that a buyer determines is all about what they perceive to be valuable. And typically, multiple story houses have more square feet. Not always, but typically. So it can kind of tip the scale one way or the other. So that leads me to the third buying feature, and that's square footage. What's the overall size of the home? How old is it? When was it built? Does it have its own private pool? Yes or no? Not an amenity type shared pool, but does it have its own pool? And then the lot, is it oversized compared to others in its neighborhood? Does it offer certain features like a water feature? Tell me about the lot. Those, again, are what I would consider to be the framework. Those are things that are not easily changed. And it's not something that you can just slap paint on and call it new. These are the bones that make up a property, okay? The reports that we're going to prepare are going to look very similar to this, okay? So for our purposes, we always start with what's sold. What did buyers say yes to? Because that's what we are most concerned with. And what feature patterns exist within those ranges that buyers said yes to? Because we have to be able to justify our particular price entry point, however it falls. And we justify it by the features, okay? So this is just a good example of those 3 ranges. So you'll see, say that I pulled 10. I'm interested in 10 comps. So of the 10, say that my top 3 were my high range, okay? And then right here is the mid-range, then right here is the low range. You could have 2 that make up your high range. You could have 4. You never know. But this is sort of just a good visual example. Your subject property, or the property that you're listing, is always going to be the one at the top of this sheet, because you want to make it easy for your seller to see how their home stacks up against what buyers have already said yes to. In other words, what has already sold, okay? So this is a step-by-step. This is exactly how to set up the report that we're going to share with our seller. And it starts by going into the MLS and creating basically a custom MLS or CMA report that includes this information here. So you'll see MLS number. And again, you can customize this to include just the high points of what you're really trying to communicate, or you can include a whole bunch of this other great information. The status, obviously, what we're after right now is what's sold. Street number, street name, of course, the address, right? Price per square foot sold. What did it sell for? Number of bedrooms, number of stories. Here's those 6 key buying features. Square footage. When was it built? Does it have a private pool? Is the lot spectacular or anything that makes it different from the others? When did it close? What was the original list price? So where do they start? Where do they end up, kind of thing. And then, of course, days on the market. That's a big one, especially when you're communicating with a seller who may have a need to get out quicker than what's typically going to happen in our market. So once you've created that report in Paragon, our MLS, you can export it if you want into Excel, which will allow you to sort the information in a way that makes the most sense to you and to the seller. And for our purposes, what we're after is sorting according to the price per square foot sold from highest to lowest, because we want to be able to see those ranges that exist. So we have to start with the high range, and then we move to the mid range and the low range. Okay. Of course, then you just draw the line. Once you've sorted the information from high to low, it becomes easy for you to see those breaks in that price per square foot sold to be able to determine, okay, look, here's a clear range right here. Here's another clear one, and then here's another clear one. So you have 3 lines, high, mid, low. And then after you've been able to identify those 3 ranges, now it's time to start identifying what feature patterns exist within those ranges. So maybe what's in the high range has more bedrooms than what is shown in the mid range. Or maybe the ones that are in the high range have much higher square footage than what's considered in the mid range or the low range. So you'll start to see what each listing has in common with the next one and why those higher prices or the midway prices are justified by those features. Okay. So why do we do this? It's because a sold summary sheet, which is what we've just created, it's going to make it really easy for your sellers to identify those feature patterns along with you. Now, granted, because you're preparing the report, you're going to have a thorough understanding of where you guys should end up when it comes to price. The goal, remember, is for the seller to self-discover it based on the information that we've prepared so that they arrive at the same conclusion you do. Okay? Any questions so far?
Okay, so you're not using the CMA report at the top. You're going to go ahead and you're going to plug in all the information like in a search. You can't print that out. You need to export that to Excel.
I think you can because Paragon does give you the option to sort from high to low.
Yeah.
My own personality, I like to exhibit a little bit more control over the information, and Excel allows me to do that because
so
I can
let you can highlight them all and then you can move it.
Yes, and within Paragon, there's a button that will allow you to export your search results to Excel directly.
Oh, there is a little button.
There is a little button, yeah. So in Paragon.
Okay, so there is an export button.
Correct. So in Paragon, which is our Southeast Texas MLS, what we do, or what it will allow you to do, you can sort of create your own custom search query on what you want to see.
Yes.
So you can set all the parameters in Paragon, which makes it easier whenever you export it to Excel. Those categories are already there. So all you have to do is sort it the way that you want it to be seen. So price per square foot sold from highest to lowest, and then be able to differentiate for yourself where those ranges are. And then you can also, highlight where the range exists, and then you can underline it from Excel. It's a personal preference. I love it. But again, whatever you're comfortable with is what I would recommend using. So that makes up step 1. So now what we want to do, we want to be able to test what we think we know based on those ranges against the expired listings. So the very first step taught us everything that buyers have said yes to. This is everything that's closed, everything that's sold. And these are the features that are associated with each of those ranges. The other part of it is now testing what we think we know against what buyers said no to, in the form of an expired listing summary sheet. So our understanding of those value ranges, those 3 value ranges, is based solely on the properties that sold, right? So to build further support for what we think we've been able to see based on that first report and the justification for that, we have to test that against the homes that were rejected. The same logic should apply to both sold and expired properties. You want to see it both ways, okay? So those reports look a little bit different. Of course, your 6 key buying features are going to be there every time, because those features is what we use to be able to justify value, okay? So the features are going to be on this report as well. What's going to be interesting and where the differences are these few categories here on the left-hand side of the sheet. So how long were they on the market? What's the price per square foot listed? Where did they end up and still couldn't sell it? So this report is a little bit, it includes a few more extra pieces of information that we are going to find to be very valuable. So then this is how we do step 2. This is a procedure. We're going to go back in. We're going to go into our MLS and create another report, okay? But now we're going to include this information. So MLS number, if that's what you want to see. The status, which for our case, it's everything that expired, okay? Of course, the address, street number, street name. What was the price per square foot listed? Now we're going to talk about those 6 features. So the number of bedrooms, number of stories, overall square footage, the age of the home, when was it built? Does it have a private pool? What's the lot like? Is it oversized? Is there anything spectacular about it? What's the original list price? What is the list price at the time that it expired? And then how many days was it on the market? Okay. So once we've pulled that and we've exported it to Excel, if that's what you choose to do, you're going to sort this information according to the price per square foot listed. Okay. And so now using those ranges that we've established on our first report of what's sold, we're going to identify the range in which each one of these homes expired. Okay. This is good because say that you have a seller who says, well, I just want to price high because I just have this need to price it that way. Either they're emotionally attached or a buddy of theirs sold for what they said they did, but really didn't. Whatever the case may be, this is good because you can say, okay, so we can try that approach, Mr. Seller. However, it appears that these homes tried that same line of thinking, and the consequence was that their listing was on the market for more than 6 months and it expired. So this will visually help to communicate what the risks are and the consequences by listing higher than what you can justify. Okay?
I like that.
So using what we know based on the sold sheet, right, because it's comparing it both ways,
Right.
we can determine which range should have sold based on the feature pattern. So on the expired sheet, if somebody's in the high range and you're seeing that those homes had 3 bedrooms instead of 4, there you go. So a really, really good way to visually communicate a pretty strong message there with a seller. So step 3, now we're going to figure out what value range is most appropriate for our listing. Okay, so now, and this makes sense because at this point we should be confident with where those ranges are and why they are what they are. So what feature patterns and what features attributed to that value, which will help us to determine where our listing should be and where it falls. And again, all of this is based solely on the features of the subject home, okay? Which is why we put so much emphasis on those 6 key buying features, because those are the bones. We can't change that. That's what drives the value. That's what buyers perceive are the things that drive a certain price or a certain value.
You know what I'm shocked about though?
What?
That's not on here? Condition. Because yeah, it could have tons of bedrooms and what a square footage and everything. It might look good on paper, but then the condition, that's so shocking.
We're getting there.
Okay, I was like, yeah, because there's
We're getting
more
there.
than
Yeah, which is why we say that value is driven by features,
okay.
because buyers are who perceive value. It's all based on what they feel, what they think. And features cannot easily be changed. So
Okay,
that's where,
that's
what sets them
Let's start with that
in the
basis.
value. So that's where we
Okay.
start.
Okay.
And then we progress through the pricing strategy that also addresses amenities and the condition.
Okay.
So you're just ahead of me.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Is condition listed though on your MLS? I don't think I saw it.
Mm-mm. Not that
On
I'm
our
aware
MLS,
of.
it was right at the top. The condition was always listed. So that was like, that was the first thing you looked at because it was fair, good, excellent.
Which again is all about perception as well. So
Some were just dumps. So it's like,
right.
Whoa, yeah, it might look good on paper, but
exactly.
it's a hellhole and you have to redo everything.
Exactly. So to my knowledge, our MLS does not include that
I saw
option.
that.
But it's always interesting when you hear about different MLSs that have certain criteria. So it's pretty cool.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we're up to step number 4, right? So we want to be able to strategically position our listing or the subject home within the appropriate value range. So like I've said before, we know that we have 3 distinct ranges, but there are little sub-ranges within the range. So you can be maybe in the mid-range, but you're on the higher end of that. Okay, so that's what I mean by positioning. Okay, so most value ranges where those breaks are going to be seen is where the 2 price per square feet, I don't know, price per square foot varies by more than $10 a foot. That's a pretty big gap. Okay, so we have to be able to correctly position our listing within those ranges. So since we know that features are what determines a range, the amenities and the condition are going to dictate where it's positioned within that range. Okay, so here's where those 2 things come into play. So in order for us to figure out what the correct position is, we first have to be able to study the amenities and the conditions of the homes that were on the sold sheet. Okay. Now, amenities and the condition for each home are going to be found on like the support pages or the detail pages from within the MLS. And so that's going to help you to see what a home's condition was. Did it have any special, what I would call sprinkles on a cupcake? So the amenities, things that enhance it but aren't a feature. Okay. So determine whether that home should be priced either on the higher end of the mid-range, or maybe you're in the lower end of that mid-range, depending on what your listing looks like with amenities and its overall condition. Okay. So once we feel comfortable, now that we've placed our listing within the appropriate value range and we've positioned our listing based on its amenities that it offers as well as its overall condition, we're going to be pretty close to establishing where we should enter the market based on price. But before we do that, it's very important that we address whether or not that price is going to meet our seller's financial needs if it sells at that price. Okay. So, little side note here, the seller's financial need is checked at this point, or step number 5, because, and it's done intentionally, surprise, surprise, it's done intentionally because all of the information that we've gone through that justifies the value has been accumulated. And it's important too because we're allowing our seller into this because it's collaborative. You're gaining agreement each step of the way, okay? So what do you think about this? And we'll talk about this in the conversational aspect of it. But you're gaining agreement. Do you think that this is the correct value range? You know, what conclusions are you making, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, based on the information here? Where do you think we need to be? What range? Great, I agree. Where do you think that we need to be positioned? Great, I agree. So you've gained agreement each step of the way up until now. So at this point, they may say, okay, you know, if we sell at this price, are we going to be able to walk away with what we need to go on to our next steps? This is where something like a net sheet comes in handy. to just say, okay, well, let's play with it. And then you kind of do a quick calculation to let them know you can expect to walk away somewhere in the ballpark of here. Does that meet your financial need? Are you okay with that? And if yes, wonderful. If no, conversation probably needs to go in a different direction. Because if their financial needs aren't met, that's not good for them and it's not good for us. Then it becomes, do you want to lease? Do you want to try to lease it? Or do you want to wait to list it later, maybe when the market, and just kind of see if the market's performing any differently 6 months down the road to where we have a better shot? That type of conversation. Okay. So that brings us to step number 6. We want to be able then to analyze our competitors. Okay. So now, of course, that we've arrived on a price that we can justify and a price that meets their needs, our sellers' needs, we have to analyze our competition. Just because a seller's price can be justified by what has previously sold and then what didn't sell, it doesn't mean that's the price that the home really should be listed. Your competition, right, and the market is going to determine what your entry point should be when you go to actually go live on the market. So we have to be able to carefully consider this before we can determine exactly where to enter the market. We want to see what those, the competitors are, how we compare to it, and that's going to help determine if we're very, very aggressive, if we can not be as aggressive, obviously to take into consideration your seller's timing too. So another little visual here, you'll notice those 6 key buying features right here on the right-hand side. Your listing is always on the top row. You've got price per square foot listed, end list price, how many days on the market. So in other words, how many price adjustments have been made here at the time that you pull the report? How long have they been on the market as active? Okay, because again, this is all about our competitors. So here's how we create this sheet. And this is our third and last sheet. So we have a sold summary sheet, an expired summary sheet. And now we have an active summary sheet. So we're going to go back to the MLS, create another set of data, a custom report that includes this information here. So the MLS number, status, the street, number and address, price per square foot listed, and then of course your 6 key buying features, as well as the original list price, the current list price, and the days that are on the market. Now, after you pull that information and you send it over to Excel or wherever you're choosing to work, you're going to sort this information according to the current list price. Okay. That what is going to help you identify all of the homes that are within your same range as your listing. Okay. So from there, we can kind of review the active comps by comparing those features of those comps, those amenities, that condition of the homes that are supposedly competing with ours.
Are you going straight to putting in a neighborhood? Will it let you
Yes.
pick a neighborhood?
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, most of the time, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so then this is going to help us see which of the competing homes are true contenders that we're really going to be competing against, and then which ones are just pretenders that are either priced out of their value range or whatever the case may be. Okay. Which leads us to step number 7 in our final step of our strategy. So this is where we're going to kind of say, okay, let's do this. We're going to determine the most appropriate price entry point now based on your seller's timing. So again, at this point, we've established the 3 ranges that exist. We've justified that by identifying those feature patterns. We've positioned our listing according to our listing's amenities and overall condition. We have verified that it's going to meet our seller's financial need if it goes at that price. We've also done a pretty good analysis of our competitors. So now that we've done all of these things, and now that we've revealed who our true competition is, Now we have to talk about our seller's timing need to be able to know if our price entry point that we think we have is going to align with what we're trying to do. So in other words, if you have a seller who's like, hey, I have to be out of here like yesterday, and you know that your competitors are priced really close together, be more aggressive and come in just slightly under. If you know that your seller is not in a big hurry and has time to test the market, then you can afford to go up just a little bit based on where those competitors are. Just as an effort to, of course, get as much money on the table that you can for your seller. So if a seller needs a quick sale, then the listing has to be priced below its true competitors. Not a ton, just a little bit to entice somebody. And again, if a seller doesn't have a timing need, okay, well, you don't have to be more aggressive. Okay, so this is a summary of our 7-step pricing strategy. And I'd like to call your attention to this top row right here. This is interesting. So reading it from the bottom all the way to the top, features, a home's features is how we create those ranges that exist in a neighborhood, which drives the value. So features drive value. Now, amenities, okay, amenities determine the position, where we fit within the range that we fall into, okay, which then drives price, all right? Now, the marketplace or the market tends to justify the point, right, which then helps us to determine our entry, our appropriate price entry point in the market whenever we go live with our listing. Very, very cool stuff there. Now, going through this step by step, 1 through 7, it starts by examining what sold and what didn't sell, right? Steps 1 through 4. We're going to start by identifying those value ranges that exist. We're going to test what we think we know against what did not sell in the form of an expired summary sheet. Then we're going to place our listing in the appropriate range, and then we're going to position ourselves within that range. Our justification is now solid, okay? We're going to make sure that whatever price we land on is going to meet our seller's financial needs. Then, now that a price has been established, we're going to take a look at who our competitors are. Then that's going to help us to choose the most appropriate price entry point. And now your seller has made an informed and an intelligent decision as to how they're going to enter the market according to price. Okay. Pretty easy stuff.
That makes sense.
Any questions on this so far?
No.
Cool. Okay, so this is where part 2 would typically break into part 3, but we're just going to keep rolling because now we're going to talk about how to communicate all of this with your seller. Okay. So part 1 was about preparation. Part 2 was all about interpretation. And part 3 is all about the conversation. Now, just as a quick reminder, price should never exceed value, because that would mean what? That a seller is using their needs as justification as to why buyers should pay more, okay? But if the price exceeds the value and it can't be justified beyond a seller's needs and wants, then the recommendation should be that the seller waits to list the home, okay? Okay, so this dialogue assumes that you are at a listing appointment. You're at the kitchen table with your seller in the dining room or in the kitchen. You've just got all of your things out. It's time to transition into having that pricing discussion. So this is what we would call transitional questions. Because again, it's all about switching gears to that conversation versus the presentation, okay? So as you would probably think, it's questions. Because remember, we're not telling, okay? So a couple of ways you can approach this. Let me just ask, do you think a pricing strategy is important, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? Yes or no? Okay, so share with me why you feel that way. they'll tell you. And when they get close to the correct answer, well, price is obviously very important because that's what's going to make or break us, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I agree. So what we have to remember then is that pricing is all about what? Justification. Okay. Now, what if you disagree, right? What if their answer is nowhere close to what you think it should be? A question you could ask is, would it be okay, or may I consult you a little bit on pricing? Same thing. You're going to transition into how you have done the research that's going to justify where they should be according to the information that we have. Okay. So this is a great piece of dialogue too. It sort of sets the stage for the conversation that you're about to have. And it starts by reminding them, hey, what we have to remember here is that when it comes to price, it's all about justification. So we need to make sure that we put ourselves in a position where we can always defend our list price. Because if we're ever unable to defend our list price, then we're going to lose leverage. And when we lose leverage, that's when we start leaving your money on the table. And to me, leaving your money on the table is just not acceptable. Don't you agree? And of course, they're going to tell you, yeah, I don't want any of my money left on the table. Okay, so perfect. Let me share with you the research that I've already done. Okay, so now enter the 3 summary sheets: sold, expired, active. Okay, so that's how you introduce the research that you've done. All right. Any questions on this part of it? Great. And so now with the conversation that you're about to have, you're essentially just walking them through each of the steps that you've taken when preparing these reports. Okay. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, in order for us to be able to land on the most appropriate price entry point, what I do is I implement a 7-step pricing strategy. And the first step of my strategy is to be able to identify a value range for your home. And in order to do that, what I do is study what buyers have said yes to and what buyers have said no to in past buying situations. So I have analyzed all of the properties that have sold and expired within your neighborhood or the area, depending on, where the listing is, over the past 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever is going to give you a good representation. So in other words, if you do a 3-month search in the MLS and you have two search results that come up, expand it, go out 9 months, go out 12, something that you can see a complete picture. Okay. And as you can see, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, on this sold summary sheet, there are 3 very distinct ranges that exist within your neighborhood. The ranges are completely determined by the sold price per square foot, because this is our sold summary sheet. And they really don't have anything to do with the quality of each home. Identifying these ranges is pretty easy. The challenging part is trying to figure out why the ranges exist in the first place. And it's been my experience that the combination of what we call 6 key buying features, that's what typically determines a home's value range. And those features, as you can see on the report, are things like the number of bedrooms, how many stories, total square footage, the age of the home, does it have a private pool, and then a lot location. So looking at this sold summary sheet, can you identify any obvious patterns as they relate to these 6 key buying features? So, right, you've just walked them through how you've prepared this report, what the information is, why it matters, why it's important, and now you put the ball back in their court by asking them to identify what they perceive to be a pattern in each one of the ranges. So they could be saying things like, oh, well, in this low range, those lots are really small compared to the ones that are up in the high range. Or everything in the high range has a pool, but none of the others do. Things like that. You want them to connect the dots based on the patterns that are there. Okay? So that leads us into step number 2. Now that they've identified what those feature patterns are, it's time to introduce your second sheet or your expired summary sheet. Okay. So now that we have formed some pretty good conclusions based on what we know buyers have said yes to, then what do you say about testing that logic on what buyers have said no to in order to validate what we think is true? And to make it easier, I've prepared an expired summary sheet. Enter the expired summary sheet so that we can identify the range where each one of these homes expired. And as you can see, most homes that are like yours have failed in whatever range. Okay. Why do you think that is? And so when they're looking at it and they're seeing that these homes that expired that were in, maybe your seller is in the high range, and these patterns don't match up with the features of their home, it's gonna be pretty obvious, right? Well, these are all one-story homes. Well, no wonder they didn't sell, or these square footages were smaller than what has sold in the high range over here. So again, feature patterns. That's what you're wanting them to be able to identify. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, after reviewing this information, why do you think that homes expire to begin with? Now, what if you're visiting with a seller whose home recently expired, right? So this is good dialogue. Ask them, now that they've reviewed the information that you've prepared, why do you think your home expired? And what you're after, you want them to see and be able to communicate back to you that those feature patterns that were driving value of what's sold do not exist in their home, and that they were simply priced out of their range. Okay. Once they make that conclusion, once they kind of connect those dots, you want to let them know, hey, I agree. So based on this information, what we can come up with is that homes fail to sell because they're either listed in the wrong range or they're incorrectly positioned within that range. Which leads us into step number 3, because now at this point, they've been able to self-discover what range they belong in on the sold summary sheet. You've tested that against what expired. So now let's have them determine what value range is most appropriate for them. So of course, after Mr. and Mrs. Seller, after reviewing what those buyers in your neighborhood have said yes or no to over the past 9 months or whatever the case, and given the features of your home, what value range do you think that your home best identifies with? And so, they'll say, oh, well, this one. Well, why do you feel that way? Because again, it's gaining agreement each step of the way. All right. I agree. Because again, they're going to say, well, these features are just, we're most like this one. Okay. Right. So I agree with you. Moving on. Step number 4, strategically positioning that home within the value range. So again, that is just walking them through it again. Tell me why you feel this way. So we know that you feel like you need to be in this range. I agree. Where do you think we best fit within that range? More on the high end or more on the low end? And why do you feel that way? I agree. Okay. So step number 5, making sure that the price position satisfies the seller's financial need. Remember? So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, now that we know what value range that we should be in, and we've correctly positioned it within that range, we ought to make sure that whatever price that we're going to land on somewhere around here is going to meet your financial needs. Now, going back to being able to learn how to position it, it's been my experience that a home's proper position within a value range is really determined by its amenities and its overall condition. And during our home tour, you pointed out this, and this as amenities that you believe add value to your home. Okay. Now, what I've done is I've printed out these support sheets for each of the homes that are on the sold summary sheet, and I've highlighted those amenities that those homes share with your home. So to study the condition of each home, I look at the remarks section, which in our MLS, that is what we have, agent to agent remarks,
Yes.
along with multiple pictures. Okay. So as you can see, homes that have similar amenities and have a similar condition as yours are located in the mid end of the range that we belong in. Can you also see that homes with these amenities and that appear to be in great condition are selling at a premium within this range? Perfect. So, given the amenities and the condition of your home, where do you think that we should be positioned within the range? Share with me why you feel that way. I agree. So, let's see now if your financial need is going to be satisfied at that price. Any questions on this? Great. Step 6. So, now that we've established where we're positioned within the range, we've also established that your financial needs are going to be met. We have to now compare your home to other options that our potential buyers have in your neighborhood around the same value or our competitors. So this is going to be able to help us identify who our true competition is, and it's going to also tell us if we need to make any kind of price adjustments before we enter the market. So the active summary sheet that I've prepared for you lists all of the active properties in descending order according to their list price. Okay. Now, looking at this report, which homes appear to be in competition with us? Again, putting the ball back in their court, keeping them involved each step of the way, getting them to self-discover based on the information that's out there, what is most appropriate for their particular situation. I agree. So, using the active summary support pages that I've also printed from the MLS, let's take a look at those features, the amenities, and the condition of each one of these competitors to see if they really are who we need to be competing against. And then, of course, at this point, you've highlighted all of the similarities on those support pages that match up with your listing. Now, they've gone through, they've looked at the features, they've looked at the condition. So what do you think, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? What you're looking for is that they have a solid understanding of where they need to be. Okay. I agree. So now that leads us to step number 7. I love this dialogue that we're about to go through because there's a lot of subtlety in it, in the way that you can differentiate yourself, which I really like, as if having a strategy doesn't differentiate you enough. I think that's great. So here we go. The mistake that most realtors make when pricing a home is not considering all of the information that has to be considered before placing a home on the market. So let's make sure that we've covered all of our bases. Have we considered the features, the amenities, and the conditions of the homes that buyers have previously said yes to? We have. Have we also considered the features, the amenities, and the conditions of the homes that buyers have previously said no to? Yes, we have. Have we considered the features, the amenities, and the conditions of the homes that are currently competing with yours? We have. What about considering the features, the amenities, and the conditions of our listing? Sure. Have we considered your financial needs in this transaction? We have. Is there anything else pertaining to price that we do need to consider? So based on all the information available and your timing need, at what price do you think we should enter the market? If it's reasonable, say that it's, right around where it needs to be based on the value range and positioning in that range. I agree. So now that we've agreed on that price entry point, how will you feel if the home sells tomorrow? Okay. What if it's unreasonable? What if they've gone through this, you gained agreement every step of the way, and they still think that they either need to be positioned higher in the range or in a totally different range? Yeah. Share with me why you chose that price. You need to understand the logic of it, and you also need to understand the motivation behind it, okay? Because it could just be a simple misunderstanding, that they're not seeing what the data is trying to show them that could be up to us to help explain it. Or you could be dealing with an unreasonable seller on your hands that has unrealistic expectations of what could happen with his listing because that's just what he feels like is going to happen, right?
Did you just go with it? Like, I mean, your realtor went with you.
She did, and I was the unreasonable seller. But valuable lesson learned for me. We were on the market way longer than what we should have been. I'm very visual, so if she had prepared something like this and put it in front of me, I wouldn't have liked it, but I would not have bucked her like I did, because it was right there in front of me, and I don't want to be, who am I? I don't do this for a living, but I was convinced. I mean, there was like no talking me down. I was convinced, and I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong. And so
they self-discover later if they still
I did.
Are unreasonable.
Yeah. And most of the time they come around. They do. They come around and they're like, okay, I get it. Like Dana was talking about it in the sales meeting this morning. They're like, oh, okay, I'll put the new roof on. I get it. Yeah. So it does sometimes take a few weeks or a few months. And you'll know when you're in these conversations, if you are dealing with somebody who is going to come around, or if it's somebody who's just as hard-headed as the brick wall, So, again, that's the beauty of it. It's your business. You can choose to go whichever direction you'd like to go.
Yeah.
Just know that the question that I would be asking in my mind is, how much of my time and my energy and my resources am I willing to tie up in this if it doesn't go the way he thinks it's going to go? Right.
Yeah. So, if they don't need to move out soon and they have all the time in the world, I mean, that's great. It might be overpriced and he has time, and then you wasted all your time because it's never going to sell. So that's something to think about.
Yeah. And it's a personal decision.
Okay.
So, pricing game summary. Why would I list my home with you? Because I get results. And what results do sellers want? Their primary goal and their primary need is to sell the home. Now, homes sell for 2 reasons. Those reasons are price and exposure. So are homes in the MLS properly exposed? They are.
Yeah, I love the IDX number that you get and how it, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that it populates to everything. Like I was looking on realtor.com and
that's how it syndicates.
Do I have to put these listings on realtor.com? She goes, no, it populates over.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank God, because our MLS, you had to manually go in.
You're kidding.
And add them. We didn't have that feature. I think it shared on one, but all the rest we had to put in. So
no, our listings are syndicated. So they go to remax.com and then everywhere.
That's awesome. They go a lot of places here.
They do.
That's good.
They do. So if homes sell for 2 reasons, price and exposure, why is it that homes expire? Because they're priced inappropriately. It's not about exposure. If they're in the MLS, they're exposed properly. So who determines the price? Sellers. But do sellers have direct access to the MLS? No. Nope, not here. Why do realtors then take overpriced listings? It could be lack of knowledge. Maybe they just don't know, right? Maybe it's a lack of confidence. They don't want to do anything to jeopardize getting the listing. Could just be a lack of, hey, I don't care. I'm really just taking the listing to get buyer leads that come from it. So what is the realtor's role? It's to determine the value and justify the entry point. So what determines value? The features of the subject home. Entry point, of course, current market conditions. What's going on with your competition? What justifies value? An entry point. Features, amenities, and condition of what sold and what didn't sell. And then the features, amenities, and the condition of active listings. Are price, value, and entry point always the same? No, they're not. What's the best way to help sellers self-discover those differences? A strategy, a process, something that we can formulate in informed, intelligent decisions based on information that we're going to use. Okay. Thus concludes the pricing series. I would love to know what resonated with you guys. What were your takeaways, your ahas?
I just like the plan of doing the sold, expired, and then current active listings and letting them be in control, self-discovering.
Yeah. What do you think the value of allowing them to self-discover really is?
They're going to take ownership of that price.
And how does that affect your business? How does that affect you throughout the process?
It means they're all on the same page, all
Yeah.
have a good partnership.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Nicole, any questions? Anything that stood out to you that was like, oh my goodness, I did not even think about it that way?
All of it. It's all good.
All of it, she said. Yeah, you know, and it is it's interesting because when I hear people talk about the way that they are having their conversations with sellers, they're adopting so much of this already. It's so funny. And LaJonna, that you guys are pretty much in the same classes all the time, she's new. And she went with John on a listing appointment. And I said, hey, call me because I would love to know, because it was the same day that we did this as a pricing thing. I said, I would love to know how he is communicating, how he's arrived at a price and how he includes a seller. And she called me the next morning. She was like, Kristen,
What do you do?
she said, every part of it he's doing. The only thing he didn't do was the expired. He does what's sold and what's active, and he prints out the support sheets and he says, so what do you think? And what do you feel? And I'm like, that makes me so happy because, and John has been through a lot of this as well, but even somebody who's been in it a while is still doing these steps. They just don't realize that it's an actual step-by-step strategy that helps them in listing appointments and listing conversations. So she was like, it was so awesome because it was fresh on her mind because she had just went through the class, and she said, you know, it was something that I got to see in real life in a real scenario. And she said, it just made me feel so much more comfortable to know that when I go do it, I can rely on this and know that I'm doing it the way that my team leader does it. So it was really cool. What I also, some bonuses that I can send your way, you guys, the reports that I built in Excel that have like the 6 key buying features on the right, the ones that are shown in this, I've prepared them in Excel on a tab. Like, so each one has a tab, active, sold, expired. And when you print them, our Remax One logo is at the top. So all you have to do is just print them when they're ready after you export your information, of course, from the MLS. If you guys would like that, I'd be happy to send it. And then Nicole, I'll make sure that you get a copy of this as well.
Thank you.
Also the workbook. So that the workbook that has all of the scripts and the dialogue and the step-by-step procedures on how to do each report, that's in Back Agent. I don't know if you have your own account or if you're using Carla's, but under Back Agent, under Office, if you go to Documents and then the folder that says Agent Development Events, click on Pricing. There's a little subfolder in there called Pricing. The PDF workbook that has all of those things is in there. So you can print that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other comments, questions, feedback today before we wrap up? Okay. Awesome. As always, thank you for your commitment to your development and to your growth. I'm here if you guys have any questions at all. And I cannot wait to hear how it goes whenever you guys implement this. Okay. So have a good day, Nicole. You guys have a good day as well. And we are going to wrap it up.